The ship had no name that anyone could agree upon. Different species called it by different things. The Vitari called it the Maw. The Dresden called it the Empty God. The Sorn Collective had a word for it in their common tongue that roughly translated to that which should not be looked at directly. Most species possessing even a modicum of real knowledge regarding galactic history knew exactly what it was, where it was, and why no one approached it. Those who did not know learned quickly, usually from an elder who would sit them down with a grave face and explain it in the tones people use when they are not exaggerating. The ship drifted at the edge of the railing cluster, a region of dead stars and cold rocks at the outer boundary of the galactic map. The cluster itself was not particularly dangerous. Ships passed through it along trade routes without issue. The rocks were easy to avoid, and the dead stars radiated nothing worth worrying about. The entire region was quiet, dark, and utterly unremarkable in every respect, with the exception of the ship. It had been there for over 400 years. No one knew who built it. No one knew how old it was before it was found. No one knew what it was for, where it came from, or what it was waiting for. But everyone knew, simply and concisely, that it was a hazard. It had been in every galactic safety protocol for the last 300 years. Every species that attempted to land on it perished. Every single one, without exception. The Dresden were the first, 390 years ago. A group of 12 of their best engineers set out in a pressurized boarding craft to study the ship. The Dresden were not reckless. They were careful, patient, and methodical. They had mapped 17 star systems without a single crew loss. They moved slowly, scanning, observing every precaution. Their vessel reached the ship's hull and touched the surface. A single broadcast arrived, a long, rising tone without words. Just this lonely sound, climbing higher and higher for 4 seconds. And then, silence. The vessel was never found. The engineers were never found. The only evidence they had ever been there was a burn mark on the hull of the great ship, a faint, meter-wide shape vaguely resembling an outstretched hand. 40 years later, the Keth attempted it. The Keth were not engineers, nor were they patient. They were warriors, tall, four-armed beings with gray skin and eyes set too wide on their faces for other species to look upon with comfort. They had conquered 11 systems over the centuries and had a simple approach to things they wanted. Take them. They sent 400 soldiers on 5 heavy assault vessels with enough equipment to crack open a moon, broadcasting the entire operation live so every species in the sector could watch them claim the derelict ship. The Keth commander gave a speech before the fleet departed. It was recorded, archived, and later studied by historians as a masterclass in excessive overconfidence. Every species in the sector watched the broadcast. When the 5 assault vessels reached the 500 meter mark from the hull, they all ceased to function. No explosions, no laser fire, no missile strikes. They simply stopped. Life support, engines, backup systems, emergency manual controls, everything went dark and silent in less than 3 seconds. The 5 vessels drifted there for 2 days until a rescue team moved close enough to attach cables and tow them back. Inside, they found 400 soldiers, all dead, all sitting in their chairs, hands resting on their knees. No burns, no wounds, no signs of what killed them, but each of the 400 wore the same expression. The Keth were not a fearful people. They had built a culture around pain thresholds and the suppression of fear. Yet each of those soldiers looked afraid, not surprised, not confused, but deeply, completely, and utterly terrified. Xenobiologists and researchers argued for decades about the interpretation of what they saw, but there was no real disagreement about the fact itself. Something had scared 400 trained Keth warriors to death without even touching them. The galaxy took note, updated star maps, placed a warning symbol next to the ship's coordinates, and settled into a tacit agreement to stop discussing it in public. The ship received the informal name The Condemned, which first appeared in the internal routing warnings of a small courier company before spreading across navigational databases as such things do not officially, nor by anyone's decree, but simply, quietly, and thoroughly, until no one could remember ever calling it anything else. Do not approach, high danger, cause unknown. Over the next 3 centuries, 9 more attempts were made. Not all belonged to warriors. The Vitari were diplomats by nature. They sincerely and without cynicism believed that any intelligence capable of building something so vast and enduring could be negotiated with. They sent a small vessel with their three most respected orators, bearing what their culture considered meaningful gifts, broadcasting greetings in 47 languages on rotating frequencies. The ship reached the edge of the condemned's effective zone, and then, like everything before it, it went dark. The Vitari did not send a second mission. They held a memorial service for their three orators and quietly removed the condemned from the list of future diplomatic contacts. The Sorn Collective, which consisted not of a single species but of 6 networked together, sent automated probes instead of a crew. The probes lasted longer than anything else. They transmitted data to the collective for nearly 11 minutes. The data was studied and debated for 100 years. It showed, among other things, that the interior of the ship was pressurized, that it contained a breathable atmosphere compatible with most known species, and that, somewhere inside, something was moving. The Sorn never discovered what exactly was moving. Their probes went silent and never reappeared. The Keth tried a second time 80 years after their first attempt, this time with 1,200 soldiers and significantly improved technology. The result was the same. Every single one sat quietly, in fear. Following this, the Galactic Council officially classified the condemned as a forbidden zone. It was their way of saying that the problem was beyond their current solutions, and they hoped it would someday become someone else's concern. Captain Alaina Vos was 34, compact with sharp features, short brown hair she cut herself, and a habit of standing with her arms crossed a pose her crew quietly called the wall. She commanded the SS Resolute, a medium-sized survey and rescue vessel from the Kepler Station network. The Resolute was not a warship. It had 2 light defensive cannons, an engine that Marcus said was fine and Voss said was held together by stubbornness and habit, and a crew of 11 who, for reasons rarely discussed in detail, decided that working at the edge of known space suited them better than what they had been doing before. She learned about the condemned on the 3rd day of routine mapping in the Tarsus Belt, when her first officer, Dacrith, sat opposite her in the mess hall and silently placed a data chip on the table. She looked at him. "You'll want to read this," he said. She took it and read. It was a priority alert from the Galactic Council, marked Level 4, intended only for senior commanders of member species. The Keth had made a 3rd attempt to reach the condemned. 1,200 soldiers, 3 full assault wings, and a specially designed ship with an AI pilot, engineered to reach the hull before any defensive systems could react. The vessel, the Sea, apparently approached to within 50 meters. Its sensors recorded contact with the hull. Then, all 1,200 soldiers and every ship in the fleet did exactly what the others had done before them. They sat, they went silent, they died in fear. The alert was not about the deaths, it was about what happened after. After the Keth fleet went dark, long-range detection probes monitoring the Forbidden Zone recorded, for the first time in 400 years of documented history, movement of the condemned. It rotated on its axis, slowly and deliberately, approximately 17 degrees. The rotation stopped when its front was clearly and unequivocally pointed toward the inner systems, toward inhabited space, toward the central worlds where billions of people lived their lives. Voss read the alert twice. She looked at the star map on the wall panel. The railing cluster was a small, shaded region near the outer edge of the mapped zone. Their current position was 4 light days away. "Every species that tried," she said, "is dead." "Dead," Dacrith replied. She was silent. From somewhere deep in the ship, she heard Marcus hitting something with a wrench, a sound she had come to associate with the ship being simultaneously broken and fine, which was essentially their entire operational life. "Plot a course," she said. Dacrith reached into his pocket and placed a second chip on the table. "Already done," he said. "About 2 hours before I brought you the first one." She looked at the chip, then at him. "You waited?" "I wanted to see if you would say it yourself without asking me," he said. "For my own peace of mind." She took the second chip. "Get everyone in the main hold." An hour later, she told them everything. She stood before the main hold while all 10 crew members sat on cargo crates and folding chairs, and she displayed the full picture on the screen behind her. The 400-year history of the condemned. Every species, every case of death, every data point transmitted by the Sorn probes, the Council signal, the ship's movement. She used simple language. She used the word dangerous. She used the word died, and she did not soften or rephrase anything to make it sound manageable. It was unmanageable. She had no plan yet, but she was going there anyway. Then, she told them the course was already plotted and that anyone who wanted off could say so now with full contract pay, no records kept, no explanations, and she would arrange a transfer to the nearest station without saying a word to anyone. 10 seconds of silence. Marcus Webb raised his hand. He was 47, broad-shouldered with gray in his beard, and the constant squint of a man who had spent too many years working in poor lighting. He had lost 2 fingers during a rescue operation years ago and never spoke of it. He said, "What's the plan when we get there?" "Still working on that," Vos replied. He nodded, satisfied, and lowered his hand. Yarama said, "Every species that tried went the same route. Military force or technology. They all tried to take the ship by overwhelming it." "Yes," Vos replied. "No one has tried anything else." "The Vitari tried diplomacy," Dakrith said. "Still died. But they went with an agenda, still trying to get something, still trying to force the ship to give them what they wanted." A silence fell over the room, the kind that happens when people are reflecting. "I keep coming back to that too," Vos said. Rin, the pilot, stood at the back with her arms crossed, with an expression that was impossible to read. As always, she said, "It moved after the last attack, turned toward the inhabited systems." She paused. "Seems like it's tired of being bothered. Or testing a reaction," she suggested. "Testing what?" asked Brant Cole. Brant was the security officer, the loudest person on board, and possessed a reliable talent for saying exactly what everyone else was thinking but hadn't voiced. No one answered, not because it was a bad question, but because the answers were still forming. 4 light days to course. 3 days at current speed, Vos said. "Anyone want off?" Silence. Brant raised his hand. Vos looked at him. "I'm not getting off," he said. "I just want it officially noted that this is complete insanity, and I want it in the protocol." "Noted," Vos said. "Now give me that crate. I need to sit." The Resolute changed course. The engines hummed, and the Tarsus belt was left behind. And ahead, 4 light days away, was the dim edge of the railing cluster and something ancient and dark, waiting inside. Within 6 hours of changing course, they received 11 separate warning transmissions from 8 different species, official recommendations, urgent requests, and what one crew member described as outright pleas. Every message said the same thing in different languages. "Turn back." Vos composed one response and sent it to all 11 simultaneously. It read, "Thank you for your concern. We are a registered survey vessel operating in uncontrolled space. We will maintain contact throughout our approach and do not expect to require assistance." The responses to this were more alarmed than the initial warnings. She stopped reading them. On the second day, Dakrith came late to her cabin and stopped in the doorway. 14 long-range detection probes are watching us right now, he said. 6 different species. "Good," she replied. "At least someone will know where we were." He leaned against the doorframe. "Are you afraid?" She looked at her cold coffee. "Yes," she said. "And you?" "Since I plotted the course," he replied. "For the same reason you are. I think something has been there for 400 years, and nobody knows what it wants." And it moved. For the first time in 3 centuries, it moved. He paused. And it didn't move toward the Keth home system. It didn't move toward the Council. It moved toward the inner systems, toward the youngest species in the galaxy. Vos looked at him. "We are the newest here," she said quietly. "The most recently arrived. And the first thing the Condemned does after 300 years of stillness is move. Right when humans start showing up in the outer sectors." Dakrith paused for a moment. "It could be a coincidence," he said. "Maybe," she replied. Neither of them believed it. On the morning of the 3rd day, Rin's voice came over the intercom. Cautious, controlled, a fraction slower than usual. "Captain, you should come here." Vos came. On the long-range display, close enough to be a shape rather than a dot, was the Condemned. Even at that distance, through sensors and cameras, it looked wrong in a way that was hard to explain. Not wrong like something broken, but wrong like something that existed at a slightly different angle to everything around it, as if the space it sat in followed slightly different rules than the rest of the cluster. "Look at the probe data," Rin said with that same cautious certainty. Vos looked. The Condemned had turned again. The probes had tracked it, calculated the new course, and matched it against navigational data. It was aimed directly at the Resolute. It had been aimed at them for 6 hours, since the time they stopped reading the warning transmissions. Brant appeared in the bridge doorway with a protein bar. He looked at the display. He chewed slowly. Then he said, without much conviction, "Cool." He went back to finish eating. Vos stood at the display and watched the dark form ahead, massive, patient, and watching. And she thought of the 12 Dresden engineers and the 400 soldiers sitting quietly and fearfully. And she thought of the Vitari with their gifts and their 47 languages. And she thought of the words, "No one has tried anything else." "All right," she said to the ship on the screen, to the empty bridge, to herself. "Let's find out what you want." They crossed the outer edge of the railing cluster on the morning of the third day, and none of them had slept the night before. This was not unusual before a complex job. Vos had seen it hundreds of times. Crews before difficult work became restless. They double-checked things that didn't need checking, ate more than they needed. They had conversations that started about ordinary things and ended in long silence. It meant the crew was alert. Those who weren't restless before dangerous work were the ones she worried about. But this felt different from normal pre-mission tension, and everyone felt it. Equipment checks were longer. The silence was deeper. 3 separate crew members told Rin privately that they weren't afraid, which meant all 3 were terrified and couldn't say so directly without feeling it was a failure. Rin told this to Vos over coffee at 4 a.m., when the mess hall was empty and the Resolute was operating on a night cycle. Everything was dimmer and quieter. "I know," Vos said. "They'll do their job," Rin said. "Fear is fine as long as it stays in the legs and doesn't move to the hands." "I know," Vos said again. Rin held her mug with both hands and studied the star map on the small panel above the galley window. The Condemned was now a marked point on it, close enough to have its own marker, its own symbol. The symbol the navigation database used was a small red diamond, which meant danger of unknown type, the database's polite way of saying, "We don't have a category for this." "Do you think it knew about us before it moved?" Rin asked. Vos had been pondering this for 3 days. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe it moved for a completely different reason, and we're seeing a pattern that isn't there." "There is a pattern," Rin said simply. "It aimed right at us. Out of everything in the sector, it's not a coincidence." "Then yes," Vos said. "It knew." "Then why us?" Rin asked. "Outer sectors are full of hundreds of human ships right now. Why the Resolute?" Vos looked at her coffee. She had no answer. She had been searching for one for 72 hours and still hadn't found it. The Resolute wasn't special. It was an average survey vessel with a good but not exceptional crew, an engine that relied mostly on Marcus's refusal to acknowledge its disrepair and a record of solid, unremarkable work over 12 years of service. There was no logical reason for an ancient and apparently deadly ship of unknown origin to single them out of the dark cosmos, but it had. "Get some sleep," Vos told her. "I need you sharp for the approach." They reached what everyone started calling the outer perimeter at 11:00 a.m. The outer perimeter was not a marked line. It was the distance at which the instruments of all previous expeditions began to behave strangely. Sensors gave contradictory readings. Navigational computers briefly lost their reference points. Communications caught interference that had no identifiable source. It was a zone where ships started to seem wrong to their crews, and people wanted to leave without being able to explain exactly why. The Resolute crossed it, and Marcus said, "Speak from the engineering console," Vos said. "Engine's fine," Marcus said without looking up, "but the efficiency readings are wrong. It's showing 12% better performance than it should, which is impossible without someone performing maintenance I don't know about." He ran his hand along the edge of the console, and I'd know about that. "Sensor error?" Dacrith suggested. "It's not a sensor error," Marcus said. He placed his palm on the console panel and held it there. "I can hear it. It's running clean. Very clean. As if something went through the whole system and smoothed it out." He looked up. His expression was that specific look of a man who had encountered something he couldn't explain and decided to document it, not argue. "Nobody has been in my engine." Vos looked at the main display. The Condemned was ahead of them, visible now not just as a sensor reading, but as a shape. Even on the screens, even through cameras and sensor arrays, it was a thing that commanded attention in a way ordinary objects did not. It was a 3-kilometer-long mass. Dacrith confirmed this from the probe data, which meant moving along its side would be like the Resolute sailing along the wall of a large building, covered in overlapping plates of dark metal that neither caught light nor reflected it back. No visible lights on the surface, no signal beacons, no windows or ports that looked like anything a shipbuilder would place there for any purpose. Nothing that moved, blinked, or indicated anything, but it was pointed at them. Its front, a broad, curved face of layered plates that, at the right angle, looked like a closed eye was aimed straight at the Resolute, straight at them in the dark space of the cluster, as if it had been waiting in that exact position for a reason. "Weapons aren't working," Brandt reported from his station. Vos looked at him. "Our weapons," he confirmed. "Both cannons. The system shows them ready. When I try to power them up, nothing happens. No error code, no malfunction signal. They just don't turn on." Vos thought of the Keth assault vessels going dark in 3 seconds. She thought of the 400 trained soldiers sitting with their hands on their knees. "Don't force them," she said. "Leave them alone." Brandt looked at the display for a moment. Then he looked at Vos with an expression that contained both reluctance and trust, a combination she valued most in a security officer. He nodded. Leaving them in standby, he said. The internal comms screen on the bridge flickered. Then all 4 secondary displays showed the same thing at the same moment, a line of text in a language none of them recognized. White symbols on a black background, slowly scrolling from right to left. The symbols looked like nothing in the navigation database's index of languages. They looked structured like a language, like something that meant specific things in sequence, but no trained eye on the ship could read them. The scroll lasted 8 seconds, and then all displays returned to normal. It was a message. Yarama stood in the bridge doorway, having come up from the medical bay. Her stylus was in her hand, and the tip was clearly chewed. "I sent it to the translation database," Dakrith said, recording everything. "It might take time. It might take a very long time if it matches any known language at all. Log it and keep moving," Vos said. Rin kept them on a slow, steady approach, unhesitating, non-aggressive, intentional like a person walking towards something large and uncertain, choosing to do so with her chin held high. Vos chose the speed carefully, because it didn't look like fear or hostility, though she understood the ship ahead of them could likely read everything it wanted to in their behavior, regardless of them. At a distance of 300 meters from the hull, she said, "Stop here." Rin stopped them. The condemned filled most of the front viewport. At this distance, its true scale was almost impossible to hold in the mind. Each of the overlapping metal plates on the hull was larger than the Resolute. The plates overlapped in a pattern that repeated but was never quite identical, like the scales of something biological that had grown, not been built. The surface was not smooth. There were lines and grooves, markings of varying depths. Some looked manufactured and intentional, and some looked like old damage, old scars from things that had happened a very long time ago. There was a color in the metal that the cameras captured better than the human eye. Deep, blue-green veins running through the dark gray, iridescent and cold, visible only under certain angles, like the inside of some seashells. "It's beautiful," Yarama said very quietly. No one argued. "No visible entrance anywhere in the front," Dakrith said, constantly scanning. "No airlock, no docking collar, no hatch of any type that we would recognize as such. If there's a way in, it doesn't look like a door." "The Dresden burn mark," Vos said. 700 meters back along the port side," Dakrith confirmed. "Still there. Can we get to it?" "Yes." "Then that's where we're going." Rin moved them slowly along the hull. The Resolute traveled along the length of a wall that went on and on. Markings scrolled past. Iridescent lines deep in the metal caught light from the cluster's distant stars. No one spoke on the bridge. There was no particular reason for the silence, but it felt appropriate, and no one broke it. The burn mark was exactly where the record said it should be, about a meter across, rough at the edges, formed so clearly like an outstretched hand that Vos felt something move through her chest when she saw it. Not quite fear, something older than fear. "Right there," she said. Marcus was already running a scan. "The hull reads the same as everywhere else," he said. "No opening, no structural weakness, no difference in composition." He paused. He ran the scan again. "But there's a temperature difference. This area is about 3 degrees warmer than the surrounding hull. Steady. The heat is coming from inside the ship." "Like something living?" Yarama said. "Like something generating its own heat?" Marcus said cautiously. The distinction between the two was in his voice, but he didn't push it. Vos looked at the burn mark for a long time. The Dresden team had put their hand on the hull and died, but something had made this mark. Something had reached out from inside the ship to the surface or to something outside it. The mark was in the shape of an outstretched hand. Not a burn pattern, not a mechanical impression. A hand reaching out. "I'm going outside," Vos said. "Captain," Dakrith said. "I'm not taking any equipment for forced entry," she said. "I'm not going in. I'm going to go to the hull and put my hand on it. That's the only thing I'm going to do." That's also roughly what the 12 Drazen engineers did, Brandt said. They had plasma cutters powerful enough to cut through the hull, Vos said. They were there to open it by force. I'm not doing that. She looked at the burn mark on the display. I'm just going to say hello. Brandt looked at her for a long time with the expression of a man who thought the plan was dangerous but decided to support it because something in it made sense to him, even if he couldn't quite say what. He said, I'll get your suit. She went out alone. She insisted on this part. If the ship was going to do something to the first person who touched it, she wasn't going to let it do it to two people at once when she could avoid it. She suited up in the airlock, double-checked all her seals, and stepped out through the outer door into the cold darkness of the cluster. The hull was right in front of her, massive, dark, and close, and the faint iridescent veins in the metal caught the dim light of distant stars. She activated her thrusters and moved to the burn mark. She reached out. She pressed her palm flat against the hull. It was warm, not the warmth of metal that had been lying next to a heat source, warmth from inside, steady and constant. That specific warmth that comes only from something generating its own heat, from some internal process that didn't stop. She had felt it before, once, pressing her palm against the hull of a pressurized shelter after a power failure to check if the heating core was working. The same quality, the same certainty of something alive, or at least something constantly active on the other side. She kept her hand there. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing happened to her. No systems failed. Her suit held. Her readings were normal. No sound, no signal, no attack. She moved her hand slightly and pressed it again. The hull vibrated just once, softly, low, like one deep breath taken by something very large and very slow. A pulse, almost. Then 3 meters to her right, the hull opened. Not quickly, not violently smoothly, like a hand opening when not clenched into a fist. Several overlapping plates shifted and slid over one another, folding back into the surrounding hull with a sound that her helmet microphone picked up as a steady, low tone. One steady note, resonating not like anything she had heard before. The opening that appeared was about 2 meters high and 1.5 meters wide. Inside, it was dark, but not completely from somewhere deep inside. A faint blue-gray light pulsed slowly and steadily, regularly, like breathing. Vos looked at it. She looked back at the Resolute, small and solid, 50 meters away, and knew her crew was watching every second of it on the camera feed. She tapped her comms. I found a door, she said. A short silence. Then Marcus said with very deliberate calm, Of course you did. I'm going in, she said. Not alone, Dakrith said immediately. I'm putting on a suit right now. Brandt is putting on a suit, Brandt said. Yorama is already in a suit, Yorama said somewhere in the background of the comms. Vos looked at the opening. The low tone was still playing, slow and steady. The blue-gray light inside breathed in its regular rhythm. Hurry up, she said. So, Brandt and Yorama were outside in 4 minutes. Marcus stayed with the ship, which was his preference, and also Vos's order. If something went wrong inside, she needed someone competent at the Resolute's controls immediately. Rin was on the bridge. The rest of the crew was on standby. 4 of them approached the opening in the hull together. Up close, the passageway inside was wide enough for 2 people shoulder to shoulder. The walls were the same dark metal as outside, but inside, the light changed. A blue-gray glow emanated from lines running along the walls at about shoulder height. Thin lines of light embedded in the metal that pulsed in a slow, consistent rhythm. There was enough light to see, not too comfortable. The passageway went straight in for about 20 meters and then curved. Brandt held a scanner in his left hand, and his right hand was near the empty holster where his weapon usually rested. Vos had made them all leave their weapons on the ship. He didn't argue about it for very long, but his hand kept reaching back toward the holster, which was muscle memory, not intent. Temperature inside is 21 degrees, Dakrith said quietly, reading his scanner. Atmosphere meets breathing standards within tolerance. Gravity is about 0.9 of standard. He paused. These readings are identical to those the Sorn probe sent. Everything matches. Something has been keeping all this going, Yorama said. 400 years. Atmosphere. Gravity, temperature. She looked at the lines of light in the walls as she walked. Something has been keeping this place ready. Ready for what? Brandt said. No one answered. They reached the place where the passage curved, turned the corner, and stopped. The passage opened into a chamber so large that the far wall wasn't visible. The blue-gray lines of light continued along the walls and ceiling, but here they branched out and spread, multiplying across the ceiling in patterns that were clearly not random geometric, structured, repeating in ways that barely fell short of looking like something specific. The floor was flat and smooth and extended further than their flashlights could reach. From the center of the chamber, 4 large corridors branched in different directions, heading deeper into the ship. And from somewhere inside, from somewhere behind, all 4 of those corridors came a sound. Low, very low, below the comfortable range of hearing, felt more than heard. A vibration in the chest and bones. It was the same sound the hull had made under Voss's palm. The same quality, the same rhythm. Brant slowly turned, scanning in all directions. Nothing on motion sensors, he said quietly. Nothing. Nothing that reads as biological, nothing that reads as weapons systems or charged emitters or anything I recognize at all. The scanners are picking up a lot of energy readings, but nothing that classifies as a known type. The ship is active, Dacrith said. Something is working here. A lot of things. Vos stood in the center of the chamber and looked at the 4 corridors and felt with a certainty she couldn't explain and didn't try, that the ship was doing the same thing. She was looking around, deciding something. It let us in, Yarama said. Yes, Vos said. Every other species, it killed them outside. It never let them in at all. Yes, Vos said. Yarama turned to look at her. In the dim blue-gray light, her dark eyes were very steady. So what's different about us? Vos looked at the 4 corridors leading into the ship's dark heart. I don't know yet, she said, but I think we're about to find out. She chose the leftmost corridor and walked toward it. And after a short pause, a pause that people make when they take a breath before something they can't take back, the rest followed her. Behind them, the opening in the hull remained exactly as it was. It didn't close. It waited for their return. The corridor was long, and it didn't stay straight. It curved slowly, almost too slowly to notice at first. Vos walked with her scanner up, and her flashlight added harsh white edges to the blue-gray glow of the wall lines. The corridor went left, then leveled off, then dipped slightly. The ceiling was higher than it needed to be, high enough for something larger than a human or for something that wanted open space above itself. The walls were covered in the same design of overlapping plates as the outside. But here, the plates were smaller, the pattern finer, and the markings denser. Lines, shapes, and symbols that looked like the text that had appeared on the Resolute's displays, repeated in sections, differed in others, and ran from floor to ceiling in columns like a library built into the walls. Same font, Dacrith said, scanning the walls while walking. Same symbols as the transmission we received. It sent us its language, Yarama said. Or part of it, Dacrith said. Or a greeting, or its name. We don't know what we received. It sent us something, Yarama said. Even before we even got here. It sent us something while we were still on the Resolute. Vos kept walking. The floor beneath her boots was hard and seamless. The same dark metal, and it transmitted the low vibration that was still going deeper into the ship. Something pulsed in the same steady rhythm. She stopped calling it a sound in her head and started thinking of it as a heartbeat, though she was careful not to say it aloud because she was the captain, and she needed the crew to follow facts, not her metaphors. The corridor opened into a smaller chamber, not huge like the first one. This was more like a large room, 20 meters across, with a 10-meter high ceiling and walls that curved inward at the top to meet at a single point. In the center of the room was a structure, not a machine, not quite. Rather, something like a raised platform, roughly hexagonal, about a meter high. The top was flat, and on the flat surface, arranged with a precision that made them all slow down and look, were objects. 17 objects laid out across the surface of the platform, some touching, some separate, each different. Some were clearly technological components, devices, pieces of equipment. Others looked geological specimens of rocks or minerals. One seemed to be a container, sealed with markings on it. One was small and dark, and looked from a certain angle organic. Brant scanned them from the room's entrance. Not explosive, not charged, no active energy outputs. They're just sitting there. Each one from a different species, Dacrith said, walking closer. He was photographing everything. I recognize some of them. This material composition is consistent with Dresden production. This is Sorn Collective Tech. I've seen this type in reference databases, he said, straightening up slowly. This is from every expedition that has come. The room was quiet. They tried to take things, Vos said. The Dresden. They came here to claim the ship. The ship took something from them in return. It keeps records, Yarama said. She stood at the edge of the platform, looking at the objects without touching anything. These are its records, proof that they were here. The burn mark in the shape of a hand on the hull, Vos said. It didn't come from the Dresden team burning through the hull. It came from the other side, from here. The ship reached out and left a mark. Why? Brandt said. Because something was there, Vos said. It leaves a record when something comes. She looked at the platform. 17 objects, at least 17 species, all dead. She looked at the empty space on the platform's surface. There was room for more. No one said what they were all thinking. Keep going, Vos said. They went deeper. The corridors branched and connected. A system more like the internal structure of a living being than the layout of a ship built for practical purposes. There was no obvious logic to where things were. No clear separation of engineering sections from crew sections, from storage. Everything was continuous, connected. The wall markings were unbroken. The lines of light never stopped. The vibration became stronger the deeper they went. Not threatening, just present. As if the ship were breathing harder the deeper they went, or breathing with more intent. Yarama stopped in a side passage and said, "Here." The room she found was small, the smallest they had encountered. The walls were covered from floor to ceiling with the font, more densely written than anywhere else, column after column of it. And in the center of the room, suspended from the ceiling on thin cables made of the same dark metal, was something that looked more than anything else like a map. It was a sphere about 2 meters across. Its surface moved not quickly, not mechanically. It shifted slowly. Sections of it slid over other sections, the way tectonic plates move, except that the patterns on the surface were clearly positional data. Stars, systems, regions of space. Vos recognized the railing cluster. She recognized the inner systems, the central worlds, the zone of the map. She recognized the features of the galaxy she had traversed for 12 years. And she recognized that the map showed things that were not on any human map. Regions beyond the outer boundary of known space, systems where no reconnaissance mission had ever reached. A vast section of the galaxy that was marked differently than the rest, covered in a dense pattern of the ship's font, detailed and thorough, as if the ship had been there, studied everything, recorded everything. "This ship has been further than we have," Dakrith said very quietly. He was pointing at a section of the map that was so far from known space that it had no reference points at all, only the ship's own markings and designations. "Much further," Vos said. The sphere continued to shift. Its patterns rearranged slowly in an endless geological meditation. It wasn't displaying this specifically for them. It was doing what it had always done. They were just there to see it. Yarama looked at the font on the walls. She was silent for a while, which, Vos had learned, meant she was gathering something in her head. "It has been alone a long time," she said. "This ship has been here 400 years, and before that it was there." She pointed to the far reaches of the map. For however long it had been traveling alone, studying, waiting. "Waiting for what?" Brandt said. It was the same question he had asked at the entrance to the first chamber. He sometimes asked things twice. It was how his mind worked. He asked a question to open it, and then he asked it again when he really wanted an answer. No one answered him this time either. But this time the silence was different, more thoughtful. Less a failure to answer and more a choice to sit with the question. They left the map room and kept walking. 2 hours later, the ship began to test them. Vos wouldn't have called it that at first. She would have called it a malfunction, an environmental anomaly, a coincidence. But by the fourth event, she stopped arguing with herself about what to call it. The first event was the floor. The section of the corridor floor in front of them simply vanished. In one moment, it was there, solid, dark, and continuous. Then it wasn't. A gap about 2 meters across, falling away into something deep and dark below. The bottom was visible in their flashlights. The wall markings at the edges of the gap were dense, as if text built to that point. Brandt scanned the gap 15 meters down. A solid surface, nothing else. Brandt looked at the gap. He looked at the other side, where the corridor continued. He looked at Vos. Vos looked at the gap. She took a running step and jumped over it. She landed on the other side cleanly, stumbled a step, and caught herself. She turned. On her side of the gap, the wall markings continued to shift, scrolling slowly, as if something were updating them. One by one, Dakrith, Yarama, and then Brandt jumped over it. Brandt made a quiet sound of personal objection when he landed, but said nothing else. They kept walking. 40 meters further, the lines of light in the walls went out. Total darkness. Their flashlights turned on automatically, which was the programmed response. But in the sudden transition from that blue-gray glow to harsh white beams, the corridor felt different, smaller. The ship's sounds more present, the vibration in the floor more noticeable. They were in darkness for about 90 seconds. Then Yorama said, "Wait." They stopped. "The lights didn't go out," she said. "The spectrum changed. Look at your beams of light. What reflects?" Vos looked. In her flashlight beam, the walls showed something the blue-gray light hadn't shown. The font markings on the walls were three-dimensional, not just engraved in the surface, but raised, layered, with depth and shadow that the even, ambient light had completely erased. In the directed beam, they looked completely different. More like structures than inscriptions, more like a physical record than a written language. "It made us look," Yorama said. "It changed the light to make us look at this differently," Dacrith said. He was already photographing everything, capturing the directed shadows into three-dimensional depth of the markings. The lights returned after 12 seconds. The third event was the vibration. It stopped between one breath and the next. The constant low pulse that had run through the ship since they entered, that steady rhythm which Vos had stopped calling a sound and started thinking of as a heartbeat, just ceased. The silence it left behind was so complete that all four stopped walking at the same moment. No one gave an order. They just all stopped and stood in the sudden silence and felt it. 12 seconds of absolute silence. Then the vibration returned, but not the same rhythm, slower now, longer between pulses, as if the thing that generated it had made one adjustment and settled into a different pattern, as if it were watching them, noting the silence, and had decided something based on how they stood in it. Vos looked at Dacrith. Dacrith looked at Vos. He said very quietly, "It's calibrating." "Calibrating to what?" Brant said. "To us," Vos said. The fourth event was the one that removed all doubt. They found a large secondary chamber about 3 kilometers inside the ship. It was different from the entrance chamber. This one had structures in it. Not furniture, nothing recognizable as furniture, but shapes that rose from the floor in arrangements that suggested use, without revealing what. Columns, surfaces, recesses in the walls at varying heights. The lines of light were brighter here. The font on the walls was different, not scrolling columns from the corridors, but something more like images, shapes that were almost but not quite representational, like abstract pictures of things, not pictures of the things themselves. In the center of this chamber, the floor had a different texture, smoother, darker, and it was warm, warmer than the surrounding floor, warmer than the walls. The specific warmth Vos had felt outside, emanating from within. That warmth was here, generated right under their feet. She stood on the warm section of the floor and looked up at the ceiling. Above her, installed in the highest point of the ceiling of the chamber, was something she hadn't seen anywhere else on the ship. It was a circle about 3 meters across, made of a different material than the surrounding metal. Neither dark nor blue-gray, but pale, almost white, glowing on its own without any lines of light feeding it. It glowed with a steady, even light that was warmer in color than the rest of the ship. Something closer to the yellow-white of a star than the cold blue of the wall lines, and it was looking at her, metaphorically. Not the way people said the Mona Lisa looks at you no matter where you stand. The circle was oriented toward her. When she took 3 steps to the left, the orientation shifted. Not the whole circle, but a subtle change in the quality of the light, in where the intensity was focused, to track her movement. When she stopped, it stopped. When Dacrith walked across the warm section of the floor, it shifted to follow him. When Yorama sat on the floor, it settled its attention on Yorama and remained there. Brant stood to the side on the normal floor and watched all this. He said, "It's looking at us." "Yes," Vos said. "The ship is watching us," he said, making sure the idea was fully stated, fully out in the open where everyone could look at it. Directly. "Yes," Vos said. "It has been this whole time," Yorama said. She was still sitting on the floor. She pulled her knees up and looked at the glowing circle above her without any fear on her face. Something else was there instead. The expression of a person who had just realized something they had been circling for a while. The gap in the floor, the lights going out, the rhythm changing. It wasn't checking if we could handle obstacles. She paused. It was watching how we handled obstacles, how we thought, how we talked to each other, what we prioritized. It was watching to see what we are, Dacrith said. It was observing. Vos looked at the circle above her. It shifted very slightly, tracking her. "Then let it observe," she said. She reached into her kit and pulled out a small, portable camera she always carried for survey work. A habit from 10 years of documentation work. Nothing special about it. She lifted it and pointed it at the glowing circle. She took a photo of it. The circle pulsed once. One bright flash, quick and clean like a closing shutter. The same light, the same warmth, but intentional, purposeful. It took a photo in return. Brant made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. It did. It took our photo. Yes, Yorama said, and she was smiling. The first real smile any of them had smiled since landing on the ship. I think it did. The camera was quiet, except for the low returning pulse of the ship's rhythm, steady and slow. The glowing circle above them held its warmth. And somewhere deep in the ship, further inside than they had gone yet, past more corridors and chambers and things they hadn't seen, something that had been waiting for a very long time did something that, if it had a face, might have looked like relief. They stayed in the chamber for another hour. They didn't rush. They walked around the edges of the room and looked at the structures and photographed everything. Dacrith talked into his voice recorder. Yorama wrote notes on her scanner screen. Brant sat on the warm section of the floor with his back against one of the column structures and ate a protein bar from his suit pocket with complete composure, as if sitting inside an ancient and possibly conscious alien ship and eating a snack was a perfectly reasonable thing to be doing. The glowing circle above him watched him eat with what Vos would describe for the rest of her life as curiosity. They made their way back to the entrance, past the record platform and the map room and the dark metal corridors, and they went back out through the opening in the hull, which was still exactly as they had left it, still breathing its slow tone, still waiting for their return. Vos was the last one. She turned in the opening and looked back into the blue-gray darkness inside. "We'll be back," she said. She didn't say it to her crew. She said it to the ship. The tone from the opening changed pitch. Just a little, just for a moment, then settled back. Vos had been on enough survey jobs to know when communication was minimal and still complete. She returned to the Resolute and began planning for tomorrow. That night, 14 probes from alien species tracked the Resolute sitting motionless against the hull of the Condemned and tried to make sense of the sensor data they were recording. Representatives of 6 galactic governments received reports from their monitoring teams. 3 emergency council sessions were called within 4 hours. Much was said in many languages by many high-ranking officials about what the humans were doing, and what it could mean, and what needed to be done about it. None of them had answers. None of them had good ideas. They were all, in their own ways, afraid. On the Resolute, Marcus Webb was in his engine room, running diagnostics on a system that was still working at 12% above standard efficiency without explanation, humming to himself and thinking. On the bridge, Rin Chen monitored the probe signals, tracking them, and writing a very calm and thorough report on what she saw and what she thought it meant. In the mess hall, Vos was at the table with a mug of tea and all of Dacrith's records from inside the ship, and the translation database performing its work of comparison. 3 hours into a process the system estimated could take 3 days. She wasn't waiting for the database. She was thinking of the glow, the warmth, the photo it had taken of them, the way the ship's rhythm had changed after they stood in that silence together. "Calibrating," Dacrith had said. She turned the word over in her mind. Something that had waited 400 years, that had turned away every species that came to it with force or an agenda, was calibrating to 11 people on a 60-meter survey ship with no plan, no active weapons, and a protein bar eaten in its central chamber. She looked at her tea. Tomorrow she was going to go back inside, deeper this time, all the way to where that pulse was coming from. She had a feeling it was waiting for her. They returned the next morning with 6 people instead of 4. Vos took Marcus because she needed someone who could look at technology and understand what it was doing, even when the technology was nothing he had seen before. She took Nadia, who was the ship's communications specialist and the quietest person on the crew, and she had a theory about Nadia that she hadn't expressed in words yet. She took Leon Hargrove, who was crew maintenance and possessed a specific ability to remain completely calm in situations that shouldn't be calm, which was a talent she trusted. And she took Rin, which meant leaving Dacrith on the Resolute as acting captain, which Dacrith accepted with the expression of a man who knew he'd drawn the short straw but also knew why. "If something goes wrong in there," Dacrith had said before she suited up, "I need to know immediately." "You'll know," she said. "How?" "Because the monitors will stop receiving our signals," she said. "Which is the moment you move the ship out of range and contact the council and do what?" "Tell them we've made it further than anyone else," she said. "Tell them it didn't kill us. Tell them the ship breathes." That'll be enough to keep people working on it for another 100 years. That's not nothing. Dacrith looked at her. You aren't planning on coming back out, are you? Not today, not until you find what's in the center of this. I plan on coming back out, she said. I'm just not planning around the possibility that I won't. She picked up her kit. There's a difference. They returned through the entrance, past the record platform and the map room, through the corridors with their dense writing. And this time, they took the rightmost of the 4 main corridors branching from the first chamber, the one they hadn't explored yet. Vos chose it intentionally. If the ship was watching them yesterday, she wanted today to look like a choice like curiosity, like the type of intentional non-following of the same path that distinguished exploration from following instructions. The corridor was different from the one they had taken before, wider, the ceiling higher, the font on the walls less dense, but different in character. Larger markings arranged differently, with sections that looked almost like numbered sequences. Diagrams, perhaps. Instructions, perhaps. The corridor was also warmer, and as they went deeper, the warmth increased gradually, building in small steps rather than arriving all at once. Marcus walked with his scanner in one hand, and the other hand trailing along the wall, not quite touching the marked surface. He did this for about 10 minutes before Vos asked him what he was doing. Feeling the vibration change, he said. There are subsystems working in these walls. Energy conductivity, I think, though not in any configuration I've seen before. Something is moving through the walls, not electricity, not heat transfer, something I can't categorize cleanly. He lifted his hand and looked at it. But the distribution pattern is consistent, regular, as if it has a purpose, and it does it very reliably. What purpose? Urama asked. She had come again, and she spent the first 15 minutes of their walk photographing the wall font from every angle her suit could manage. Maintenance, Marcus said, or communication, or both at once. 2 things may not be separate functions here. He lowered his hand and kept walking. This ship maintains itself, he said. Atmosphere, gravity, temperature, lights that turn on. Something in these walls does all this continuously, without stopping, for however long this ship has been working. 400 years at least, Nadia said behind them. She said it just as a fact and said nothing more, which was consistent with how she communicated always the exact required amount of words, and then silence. Much longer than that, Marcus said. The probe data suggested the internal systems showed age consistent with several thousand years of continuous operation at minimum. He paused. This thing is old. They walked in silence for a moment, carrying this idea. The corridor ended in a room that was not like anything they had found a day ago. It was large. Not as large as the main entrance chamber, but large enough that when they entered it, the first thing everyone felt was the ceiling being higher than it needed to be. The room was circular, and the floor, unlike the corridor, was not a continuous surface. It had levels. Concentric rings descended from the outer edge to the center, like an amphitheater. Each level about half a meter lower than the one outside it, with the lowest point the center about 3 meters below the level of the entrance. In the center, filling the lowest ring, was a pool. Not water, nor any liquid any of them could identify on sight. It was dark as the hull metal, which shouldn't have been possible for a liquid, and perfectly still. And it gave off a faint light from somewhere beneath its surface, a deep blue, regular, like the ship's pulse. The pool was about 5 meters across. Around its edge, the floor had markings, not the font from the walls, something else. Symbols arranged in a ring, evenly spaced, each unique. Urama calculated them, moving her light slowly around the ring. 17, she said. No one moved for a moment. 17 species, Vos said. The same number as the objects on the collection platform. These are symbols. These are symbols, Nadia said. Vos crossed to the first step and began descending to the center. The warmth increased as she descended. Standing at the edge of the pool, the ship's low vibration was strong enough to feel in the chest, in the teeth, not painful, not overwhelming, just deeply present, like standing too close to a large speaker. She looked at the 17 symbols. She looked at the pool. On the ring of symbols was a gap between 2 of them. The gap was about the same width as the others, as if it were a place waiting to be filled. 18. And a symbol that hadn't been placed yet. Marcus descended and stood next to her. He scanned the pool's surface carefully. He ran the scan twice, read the results, and said, "It's not a liquid." "What is it?" Vos said. "Don't know," Marcus said. "It registers as matter, but the type doesn't match any material in my database. It's not organic, not mineral, not metallic. It registers as something the scanner can't categorize. He looked up. But it is connected to the walls. The same energy I felt in the walls. It is concentrated here. Everything is feeding into this. It's a source, Vos said. A node, Marcus said, connecting something. Nadia was walking around the ring, photographing each symbol. She stopped at the gap. She stood there for a long time without speaking, looking at the empty space between the two flanking symbols. Then she crouched, and with her gloved finger, drew a slow, simple line in a thin layer of dark particles that had settled on the floor at the edge of the pool. Just a line, testing the surface, looking at how it responded. The pool's surface moved slightly. One ripple, starting from the center and moving outward, reaching the edge of the pool and then turning back, folding back inward. And when it reached the center again, it disappeared into stillness. One ripple, in response to one mark made at the edge by a human finger. Nadia sat back on her heels and looked at the pool. In her quiet way, she said, "It knows we are at the edge of it." "Yes," Vos said. "It was waiting for us to come into this room," Nadia said. Everything else had been a corridor. "What is this room?" Leon Hargrove said. He stood on the second ring, one level up, saying nothing, observing everything. He was the type of person who needed to see the full picture before he said anything about it. And he had been building his picture since they entered. Vos looked at the pool, at the 17 symbols, at the gap between them. She thought about all of it. The record platform, the map sphere, the glowing circle that had taken their photo, the rhythm that had changed. Every observation they had made, every choice the ship had made in their presence. "I think this is the place where it talks," Vos said. "When it decides to talk," Leon said. "It hasn't decided yet." "I don't think so," Vos said. "I think we are still." She stopped. She was going to say still being evaluated, and she stopped because the word evaluation felt wrong for what was happening. Evaluation implied power-passing judgment on a lesser party. That wasn't what it felt like. "It is still deciding if it wants to," Nadia said, filling the pause. "Not if we are good enough. If it wants to." The pool was still. Vos thought about it for a long time, about a ship that had been here for 400 years, that had been out there in the unmapped darkness for thousands of years before that had watched species come and bring their weapons and their tools and their agendas, and die. All of them. Every time, without exception. She thought about how it must be to wait that long. She sat on the lower ring, facing the pool, and stayed there. Marcus, meanwhile, had returned 2 levels up and found something in the wall he couldn't stop looking at. A panel, slightly recessed the same metal plate design as everything else, but with a small rectangular section that was different. The markings on it were arranged differently, more regularly, in a pattern that 47 years of Marcus looking at mechanical systems recognized without being able to say exactly why. He stared at it for a while. He took out his multi-tool. He looked at it some more. He put away the multi-tool. He looked at the panel again with only his eyes and his experience, and the accumulated knowledge of a career spent understanding how power moves through systems. He descended to Vos. "There's a panel upstairs," he said quietly. "I think it's a control interface of some type." "Don't touch it," Vos said. "I know," Marcus said, "but if I'm reading it right." He paused, choosing his words. "If I'm reading it right, it's not in standard operating condition. Something in the system is working below capacity. Not a malfunction, a deliberate reduction. As if it's conserving something. Energy, maybe," Marcus said. "Or attention." He paused. "Like when you switch a heavy system to standby mode because you're waiting, and you don't need to operate at full power for waiting, but you're ready for it." Vos looked at the pool, at the still dark surface. "How long do you think it's been in standby?" she asked. Marcus looked at the walls, at the density and age of the markings, the worn and layered quality of the plates, things that spoke of immense time in the past. "A long time," he said. "A very long time." Vos nodded slowly. She thought of Yarama's words from the day before. It has been alone a long time. They had been in the amphitheater room for almost 3 hours when Nadia did something none of them had planned. She began to speak not to them. She sat on the lower ring, 3 meters from Vos, facing the pool, and she began to speak in a low and even voice about what she saw, not analyzing it, not reporting on it, just describing it. The color of the pool, the way the symbols were carved, the weight of the air in the room, the quality of the warmth. She spoke carefully and without rushing, the way she spoke when she was doing something she believed in, and she spoke for about 4 minutes straight before she stopped. The pool rippled, not one ripple this time, several overlapping, spreading outward from the center and returning, intersecting, creating a surface that for about 10 seconds was in constant, fine motion before settling back to stillness. Everyone in the room was completely still. "It hurt you," Yarama said very quietly. "I didn't ask it for anything," Nadia said. "I wasn't asking it to do anything. I was just describing what I see." "What do you mean?" Brant said from the third ring. "Every species that came here wanted something," Nadia said. "Dresden wanted data. Keth wanted to take it. The Vitari wanted recognition. The Sorn probes were here to collect and report. Every contact was transactional. Every species showed up with a need and tried to force the ship to satisfy it." She looked at the pool. "I didn't ask it for anything. I was just talking to it." The pool was still, but something in the stillness was different. Now denser, more present, like the difference between an empty room and a room with someone standing quietly in it. Vos watched the pool's surface. She said to it directly, "We don't know who built you. We don't know what you are. We can't read your language. We can't categorize your material. We don't understand most of what we've seen here." She paused. "We will return tomorrow, and the next day. We will keep returning until we figure out how to talk to each other correctly, or until you tell us to leave. And if you tell us to leave, we will leave." She looked at the pool's surface. "We aren't here to take anything." The pool was still. Then, from somewhere above them, from the ceiling, from the walls, from everywhere at once, the ship's rhythm changed. It didn't stop. It changed. The steady pulse that had run through the metal since they first touched it, the whole thing shifted. It slowed down. It deepened. It became something longer and lower and more intentional. And in the change was something Vos couldn't name clinically and wouldn't try to. It felt like a door opening, not a physical door, something else, something bigger. The glowing circle that had watched them in the main chamber 2 days ago, that pale white circle installed in the ceiling, the same quality of light appeared now in this room. On the ceiling, and from the pool itself, the dark surface began to glow from within. That warm, pale light, rising through the dark material, whatever it was, and the pool glowed slowly and steadily until the entire room was different. Marcus looked at his scanner. He looked at the readings. He looked at the scanner again with that specific expression of a man who doesn't trust his equipment but wishes he could. "Energy output just increased by a significant factor," he said. "The whole ship, not just this room. Every subsystem I've been monitoring in these walls, they all went up simultaneously." He lowered the scanner. "It's not in standby anymore." The warm light from the pool filled the amphitheater room, and then, from the surface of the pool and the light within it, something moved. Not a wave. Not a splash. The shape was gradual and intentional, rising from the surface. Like a shape appearing from a fog when you are driving toward it, gaining definition as it rises, becoming distinct, becoming specific. It had no color. It was made of the same pale light as the pool itself. It wasn't biological in its form. Not the shape of any species they knew, but it had dimension and structure, and it was oriented toward them. It stopped rising when it reached about 2 meters in height. It waited. Everyone in the room was completely still. Vos stood from where she was sitting. She stood at the edge of the pool, facing the light shape directly, and she said, "Hello." The shape moved. The light inside it shifted. Patterns flowed through it from base to peak, complex and fast, lasting about 5 seconds. Then it was still again. "We can't read that yet," Vos said. "We will learn. We want to learn." She paused. "My name is Alaina Vos. This is my ship. We are from the planet Earth in the inner systems. We have been traveling in space for about 100 years. A pause. "You have been traveling much longer than that." The shape was still. Nadia said quietly, "Ask it what it wants." Vos looked at the shape, at the pale light that shifted slowly inside it, patient and old and waiting. "What are you looking for?" she said. The shape was still for a long time. Then the light inside it moved again, not a fast, complex pattern. This time, slow and simple. One movement, starting at the base of the shape and rising to the top. One movement upward, rising, going somewhere. Vos stood at the edge of the pool in the warm light, in the deep pulse of the ship's new rhythm, and she looked at the shape made of light, and she understood it wasn't looking for something. It was going somewhere, and it had been looking for a very long time for someone to go with it. It took 9 days. 9 days of returning inside every morning. Sometimes all 6 of them, sometimes only Vos and Nadia. One day, Vos alone for 4 hours while the rest of the crew watched on monitors. and Dacreth sat in the Resolute's captain's chair and didn't eat his lunch. 9 days of sitting in the amphitheater room with the pool, communicating in the only language they had available at first, gesture and proximity and patience, and a slow, accumulated trust built each day without weapons and without demands. The translation database arrived on the 3rd day. Incomplete translation. The ship's language was like nothing in the Council archives, which meant it wasn't spoken or written by any species the galactic community had ever encountered. But the database found structural patterns, grammatical logic, the architecture of the language. And that was enough for Nadia to start building a bridge. She worked on it 6 hours a day in the corner of the bridge, cross-referencing the ship's font against every known linguistic root, building a frame that was mostly guesswork at first and became less so the longer she worked. The ship helped unconsciously at first, but the light shape in the pool began to respond to their attempts differently as the days went on. When Nadia spoke a word from the ship's font and linked it to an action standing up when she spoke what she believed meant rising, placing her hand against the wall when she spoke, what she believed meant surface, the light shape would either hold still or produce a ripple from the pool. Stillness meant she had it wrong. A ripple meant she was close. It was the most basic form of communication possible, 2 sides pointing at things and making sounds. And it was the most important work any human being had ever done in the history of the species, not knowing it at the time. By the 5th day, they had 30 words. By the 7th day, 80. By the 9th day, enough. On the 9th day, Vos sat alone in the amphitheater room. The rest of the crew was on the Resolute. She had asked them to stay there for this, not because she didn't trust them, because she had spent 9 days watching the light shape in the pool, learning to read the small shifts in it the way you learn to read a person's expression after spending time with them. And she had a clear sense that the next conversation would be long and require space. She sat on the lower ring at the edge of the pool, and the light shape rose from the surface, and she looked at it with what she had that served as looking. And she said, in the 30 words she had learned and 70 gestures and the rough framework of communication that was more of a feeling than a language, tell me, what are you? The pool's surface moved. The light shape held still. Then, slowly, something happened that hadn't happened before. The room changed, not physically. The walls, floor, ceiling all remained unchanged, but the light from the pool spread, expanded, rose along the walls. And in the light, the font on the walls transformed. Not the symbols themselves, which were carved in the metal, but the light moved through them in a sequence, illuminating specific sections in a specific order. And in the order was meaning. Nadia was right, it was a library, more than a library, a record of everything. The light showed her what she had been thinking. There were diagrams in the walls of the corridor. They weren't diagrams, they were maps of another type. Not geographic, but temporal. A record of a long journey. Stars encountered, systems studied. A path through the galaxy over a vast period of time, marked in sequence. Each mark a place that had been visited and studied, and at the beginning of the record, at the very earliest point of the sequence, marked differently than everything else with a type of accent that felt like weight was an image of something for which she had no words. Place. A point. The starting point before the journey, before thousands of years of travel. A place that was not in this galaxy. Vos looked at it. She looked at the light shape. She said the word she had for origin, for home, for from where. She pointed at the image at the beginning of the sequence. The light shape was still for a long time. Then the pool sent one ripple outward. Yes, Vos sat with that for a moment. This ship, this old, patient, destructive ship had come from somewhere entirely different, traveled through galactic distances in time on a scale she couldn't fully absorb, had arrived here in this galaxy and spent thousands of years studying it, crossing it, mapping its edges and its dark inner regions, and everything between them alone. Why did you stay in the cluster? She said. Why stop here, in this place, for 400 years? The light shape moved. The pool sent a ripple in a complex pattern. She couldn't read all of it yet, but she caught a word she knew. She had learned it on the 4th day. A word that meant watching, but not passive watching. Active watching, searching. And another word. The word for completeness, for a thing that makes a thing whole, that wasn't whole before. She thought about the record platform with 17 objects from 17 dead species. She thought about the empty space on the ring of symbols on the edge of the pool, waiting for 18. She thought about what Marcus had said. It was in standby mode, waiting. saving for what it knew was coming. "You killed them," she said. The light shape was completely still. Dresden, Keth, all of them. She wasn't afraid to say it. She had spent 9 days building trust. Why? The pool moved. Words she had learned. The word for intrusion, which was also the word for harm. The word for continuing, which meant something like survival. A word she hadn't heard before, new, used twice with weight. She looked at it and thought about it and felt around the edges of its meaning. And in the end, she said, "A test. You were testing them." The pool sent a ripple. "Not to see if they were strong enough," she said. "Not to see if they were smart enough." She looked at the light shape. "You were testing what they would do when they couldn't have something they wanted, what in your language now meant continuing. Every species that came here wanted to own you," she said. "They brought tools, they brought force, they brought arguments, they came to claim rights to you. And you read what they came with, and you stopped them because what they were was something you already knew, something that doesn't work for what you need." A ripple. She sat with the word she turned over. Not force, not intelligence, not civilization or age, or technological advancement, something else, something harder to define. "What did we have?" she said. "When we came here, when I put my hand on the hull and you opened the door, what was different?" The light shape moved for a long time. The pool sent complex ripples. Words she had learned, words she hadn't, and between them something that wasn't words at all. A quality of light, a change in warmth, a shift in depth, which she had come to understand over 9 days as the equivalent of a tone of voice, an emotion, maybe, something that was as close to emotion as this ancient thing could express. She caught the words for smallness, which in context meant young, the words for chaos, which in context meant unpredictable, the word for collision, which in context meant encounter, a word she hadn't heard before, which repeated 3 times. She said it back. She asked what it meant. The pool held still. The light shape moved to the edge of the pool closest to her. The warmth in the room increased. The ship's pulse, that deep vibration in the metal floor and walls and everywhere, changed its rhythm. Slowed down further, became something more like one long breath, held and then slowly released. A new word, repeated 3 times, never explained. She sat with it. She tried every angle of translation Nadia had taught her. She looked at its component sounds, its structural position in the sentences that contained it. She thought about what it described when it had been used. Context each time. The 3rd time it was used, it was in a sentence that also used the word she had learned for species or people. The 4th word of that sentence was the one she had learned as the closest the ship's language had to partner or crew. Crew. She sat on the edge of the pool for a long time. Then she said, "You want to continue?" The pool moved. A ripple, a wave real movement, the entire surface, every part of the pool moving at once. "Yes, you were mapping this galaxy," she said. "Thousands of years, and you finished. You saw it, and you want to go further. Past the edge of the mapped zone, past everything we know. Somewhere out there," she pointed up and out the direction of the unmapped darkness at the edge of the galaxy. "And you can't do it alone." The pool was still. "Why can't you do it alone?" Vos said. "You were alone for thousands of years." The light shape moved. Words she had learned, and the new word again, one more time. And this time, it was followed by one she definitely knew. One she had learned early because it appeared constantly throughout the ship's writing, throughout every conversation. A word she thought at first meant simply broken. It didn't mean broken, it meant lonely. Vos sat on the edge of the pool in the warm light and deep pulse of the ancient ship that had traveled further than she could imagine and mapped more than her entire civilization had ever found, and had come from somewhere that wasn't even this galaxy, and had been alone all this time. And she said nothing for a while. Then she said, "I need to call my crew." She returned to the Resolute and gathered them in the main hold, all 11 of them, and she told them everything. Everything. She used Nadia's word lists and her best attempts to translate what she had understood, and where there were gaps, she was honest about the gaps. And she was honest about the risk, and honest about the scale of what was being asked, and honest that she was going to say yes personally, today, right now, and that no one was required to say yes with her. Silence, the good kind, the thinking kind. "How far?" Rin said. "I don't know," Vos said. "Past everything we've mapped, past everything any species has mapped, into darkness we've never seen." "How long?" said Dakrith. "I don't know." More silence. Marcus leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms and looked at the ceiling of the main hold for a while. Then he looked at Vos and said, "It can't do it alone." "No," Vos said. "Needs a crew," he said. "And it picked us specifically? Out of every species in the galaxy, hundreds of years of attempts, it picked 11 people on a survey ship?" "Yes," Vos said. Marcus uncrossed his arms. "Then we'd be complete idiots to say no," he said. Leon Nadia said, "Yes." One word, no elaboration. Rin said, "I'm the best pilot you have, Leon. I fixed the forward sensor array 3 times last month. It's going to need me." One by one, all 11 of them said yes. Some quickly, some after a long silence. Brant was last, who looked at the wall for almost a full minute and then said, "If we don't come back, do we get to name the ship?" "Yes," Vos said. "Good," Brant said. "I've been thinking of names." He paused. "I'm going to need a minute." The galactic community found out within the next 24 hours. They found out because the 14 monitoring probes that had been tracking the Resolute went offline. One by one, the probe signals vanished from the monitoring networks of 6 different governments. When the last one went silent, the data teams that watched the feeds around the clock called their high-ranking officials with the news. The Resolute was no longer in the railing cluster. The Condemned, which was also no longer in the railing cluster, was no longer in any position that long-range scanning networks could detect. Both ships had vanished. The Galactic Council called a full emergency session within 3 hours. Representatives of 14 species were present. The meeting lasted 11 hours. It covered the consequences, the precedents, the gaps in understanding, the danger. It covered what humanity had done, which no other species had managed. It covered the possibility that humanity had been destroyed, a possibility that became less convincing the more they explored the probe data from the final hours, which showed not destruction but departure, not death, but a direction outward to the unmapped darkness beyond the edge of the galaxy. It covered the possibility that humanity, in less than 2 weeks, with an average survey ship and 11 crew members and no plan, had become the crew of the most dangerous, most ancient, most powerful ship any species in the known galaxy had ever encountered. The Vitari representative, whose people called the ship the Maw, sat in silence for the last 3 hours of the session and said nothing when others asked for her views. When the session ended and the hall began to empty, she remained in her seat, looking at the final probe photo captured before the signals went dark, a long-range photo of the Condemned. Its hull, illuminated from within now by a warm, pale light it had never shown before in 400 years of monitoring. And next to it, the small silhouette of the Resolute. Close to its hull, 2 ships aligned. The image showed the 2 ships in the moment before they moved, before they left further than any probe could follow. She had thought all her life that the Maw was a weapon. Her species had called it that for centuries. A sleeping weapon, a lethal one. She had been wrong about what it was. She had been wrong about what it was waiting for. She had been wrong about humanity, too. Every species had. Humans weren't the newest species in the galaxy because they arrived late. They were new in another sense. New in the way a thing is new when it is still finding what it is. When it hasn't decided to fear what it doesn't understand. When it will still sit in an ancient chamber and talk to the darkness and eat a protein bar against a strange column and take a photo of something alien and wait for it to take one in return. She looked at the image for a long time. Then she looked at the empty space on the star map where the 2 ships had been. On the ship, the Condemned, which now had a name that 11 people had agreed upon. A name they had painted in white letters on the interior wall of the entrance chamber in their own alphabet. Vos stood on the bridge. The bridge was not what she had expected. She had expected machines, controls, instruments, the architecture of command she understood from 20 years of working on ships. What she found was a room at the ship's front vertex with a curved wall that was transparent. Not a window, not quite, but a surface that showed the outside with a total clarity, showing the stars ahead and the darkness between them, and the edge of everything mapped and familiar falling away. The light shape was here, too, a smaller version, rising from a point in the floor without a pool. Just present, just available, just there. Nadia was at the section of the curved wall, building her dictionaries, her frameworks, her translation tools. Marcus was already in the ship's walls, figuratively and almost literally running his diagnostics and his tests, and developing an understanding of engineering systems that no other human had, and which he treated with the same quiet competence he brought to everything he had ever worked on. Rin was at the pilot position, which was not a chair and console, but something more like a space that suited her and oriented itself to her, and knew what she was doing when she was doing it, which she had tested for 3 hours, and declared acceptable with the restraint of a man who actually found it extraordinary. Brant had chosen the ship's name after 11 minutes of deliberation that involved him pacing back and forth, trying 4 different variants while the rest of the crew waited with varying degrees of patience. He chose it without a reason he could fully justify. He chose it because when he sat in the amphitheater room and looked at the pool and felt the ship's pulse through the floor, it felt like something with a direction, something that was here and going there and hadn't stopped yet. He chose it because of what Nadia had translated. The word for lonely, the word for continuing, the word for the thing that makes a thing whole that wasn't whole before. He chose a name that felt like what the ship was actually doing. He named it First Step. The crew was silent for a moment after he said it. Then Vos nodded once, and Nadia went to get the white paint. And that was it. First Step moved toward the unmapped darkness beyond the outer edge of the galaxy, carrying 11 people and 1 ancient consciousness that had waited for centuries. Millennia, longer than human civilization had existed. For someone who would appear without a plan and sit in its chambers and talk to its darkness, and not have any of it as a threat. Someone who hadn't yet learned to fear things they didn't understand. Someone new enough to still be curious. Vos stood at the transparent wall and watched the stars ahead. The darkness between them that was vast and deep and unknown and full of things no one had ever seen. The map zone passing behind them, falling away, becoming just another starting point. The ship's pulse ran through the floor under her feet, steady and deep, not standby, not waiting. Full power, fully awake, fully in motion for the first time in a very long time. She placed her hand flat against the transparent wall. That gesture she had made against the hull at the beginning of all this. Palm flat, patient, present. The wall was warm, warm from inside, from something living on the other side. She held her hand there, and she looked at the darkness ahead. And she said nothing. Because nothing required saying. And behind her, 11 people who had decided to go somewhere no one had ever been, set to work. First Step kept going.